Today marks the 71st birthday of Jim Morrison. Can you believe it? In a moment, we'll talk about Jim Morrison, friends gathered together on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. As I was mentioning, today marks the 71st anniversary of Jim Morrison, his birthday. It's just an incredible story of this individual, what happened to him, how he died at that young age again, 27 years old. Well, Frank Lisciandro was a photographer and filmmaker. He was a close friend of the singer of The Doors, Jim Morrison. Frank attended the UCLA Film School with both Morrison and The Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek, dear friend of ours who just passed away some time ago. Frank was a co-producer of the 1978 Grammy-nominated album An American Prayer, which presented Morrison's previously unheard-of spoken word recordings accompanied by some new music from the surviving Doors. We've got a little copy of a documentary up at coasttocoastam.com that Frank was part of. Just an incredible story. And Frank, welcome to Coast. It's good to have you here, especially on this day.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and I would like to give a big happy birthday to Jim Morrison.
You know, just a few days ago, I was looking at Oliver Stone's movie with Val Kilmer, who I think did a pretty good job in that movie. What do you think?
Well, I thought Val Kilmer was great. I didn't think very much of the movie. I thought it was a lot of made-up stuff about a real person.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's talk about Morrison, but tell me, how did you meet him? Give me that information. This is fascinating.
Well, we seem to have enrolled at UCLA at the same time. So although he came from Florida and I was coming from previous year at Michigan State University, we ended up at UCLA at the film school in the theater arts department at the same time. So we started taking classes together. When you start a new program, all those basic classes, the editing, the camera work, the scenic design, the acting, all of that stuff, the basic preliminary classes you have to take. And Jim and I were thrown into those because we started at UCLA at the film school at the same time, and we got to know each other somewhat. Hi, how you doing, classmates and whatnot. Then I got to know Ray Manzarek, who was also in the film school, and I got to know him quite well. And before you know it, Ray and I were hanging out together a lot. And the three of us would see each other all the time.
I had a chance several years ago, Frank, to have Robbie Krieger and Ray Manzarek on the show, and I did not know at that time that Ray was battling cancer. He didn't tell us. And he came in, and, Robbie was up and bubbly, and Ray, his personality, very low-key, not excitable. And producer Tom Danheiser and I were talking, going, gosh, I don't know. He seems like he doesn't like us or something. Ended up being one of the nicest guys I've ever met. I mean, he just, he's very slow to get to know, as you probably know. But once he opens up, what a delightful guy. And he gave me a T-shirt, a Doors T-shirt, and he just was a super guy. I miss him. And, just to know that we just have Robbie left, it's kind of sad, isn't it?
Well, of course, there's John Densmore, the drummer, too.
Yeah.
And, it is very sad losing Ray. I was at his memorial service last year, and an awful lot of people were there, and we all expressed that deep regret that he had died so young. Still active in music as a performer, as a songwriter, as a producer, a genial guy, as you said, very heartwarming sort of guy, and a very, very clever and intelligent guy, too.
Now, tell me, in your opinion, Frank, and you wrote the book, Jim Morrison, Friends Gathered Together, tell me of the mystique behind Jim Morrison. Why did he catch on? I guess we're going to have to talk about how the Doors began, but what was that power that they had that just made this planet go crazy?
Three great musicians. And one incredible lead singer who could write like an angel, who could write lyrics that were poetry, and then perform them in the most charismatic way possible. You got guys, those three guys were jazz players, they were rock players, they were blues players. Robbie knew flamenco guitar. They could do anything musically. And with Jim out there in front of them, they could control an audience. He loved to really take an audience in the palm of his hand and take them on a trip. And, of course, the song sounded great on the radio, and they sound great today, 40-some-odd years, almost 50 years later.
We play their bumper music on the program, Frank. We're going to play some during this hour with you and take calls with you next hour from people who are fascinated with this. You had a chance to see them on their very first gig, which was in Hollywood, wasn't it?
I did see them on the first gig on the Sunset Strip. I had heard rehearsals and I had heard a demo tape, but I did see them the first time they appeared live, and it was it was a disastrous evening.
Was it? What happened?
Well, Jim was still very shy and still very unsure of himself, and for most of the performance, he kept his back to the audience. He wasn't trying to imitate Miles Davis. He was just unsure of himself. And his voice kind of broke a few times, and it was a little bit creaky. The band played good, and when we walked out, I turned around to my wife and I said, these friends of ours, I wish they were going to do better than they seem to be doing. I just don't think they're going to make it. So from that day on, I never made a prediction about another band.
Well, I tell you what, they did hit their home run at their point of popularity. How big were they? And let's look at them like the Beatles. Were they as strong as the Beatles?
Well, they were supposedly for several years, or a year and a half, 18 months, maybe longer, the best-selling rock band in America. So obviously they were a powerhouse. I don't know if they outsold the Beatles or had as many hits as the Beatles or the Stones, but they were our number one band for a long time. And they would fill auditoriums, any size auditorium, and thrill an audience.
What happened in Miami, Frank? I'm looking back at the movie episode, of course, where they claimed that the Jim, took his clothes off on stage and got arrested. Well, what happened there?
It's a pretty complicated story, and essentially Jim arrived late for the concert, and the hall manager or whoever was promoting the concert had ripped out all the seats so we could have more people there. So suddenly this Dinner Key Auditorium turns into a standing room only sort of concert, at least on the ground floor. There was a big fight between, obviously, the Doors manager, Bill Siddons, and the promoter, because the promoter didn't want to give the band more money. Jim arrives. He's late because he had an argument with Pamela. She was supposed to accompany him. He was drunk. He gets there. He had to change planes. They had to find a new schedule for him. He gets there, and he walks into this turmoil. And the audience was overheated. I've heard temperatures in close to 100 in that space. I wasn't there that night. So I'm taking it from Vince Traynor, who was the Doors road manager, and is one of the people I had a conversation with for my book. He has a chapter in the book, and he tells us all about what happened in Miami. He was right there on the spot from the moment that the equipment arrived. The promoter actually sequestered or kidnapped their equipment because he was afraid the band wasn't going to go on because of this contract that he broke. Anyway, the band finally went on, and Jim had a little bit too much to drink, and he started taunting the audience, and they were going crazy. They loved it, the audience. Before you knew it, things just weren't happening right. Did he ever expose himself? He claimed he never did. And really, if you look at the pictures, there were several hundred pictures introduced at the trial. There's not one single picture that showed that he exposed himself.
How close were you to him, Frank?
Excuse me?
How close were you to him? Was he like a dear best friend?
I'd say he was about as best a friend as I would have had at that time. We did a lot of things together. We made films together. We traveled together. We went to film festivals together. I photographed them on, dozens of occasions. So, yeah, it was, for a long time, we saw each other virtually every day.
Was there a part of him, Frank, that you didn't like?
You know, I would have rather not see him fall into alcoholism. And, you know, not that he was a mean drunk, not that he was kind of a hostile or aggressive drunk. You know, he liked to play the clown for laughs and to entertain people when he was drunk. But it diminished his capacity as an artist, as a functioning human being, and I hated to see that part of it. Other than that, he was a great friend. He was generous. He was courteous. He was kind. He was humble, quiet, and discreet. What more could you say about a friend?
Yeah, that's true. Well, stay with us, Frank. We're going to come back in a moment. We're going to talk about Feast of Friends, the DVD that is out, and have you tell us a little bit more about that. We're talking about the life of Jim Morrison. We'll be back. Welcome back to Coast. Frank Lisciandro with us, of course, and his website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Frank, tell me about the DVD documentary, Feast of Friends.
Feast of Friends was a project that was started essentially by another classmate of ours at UCLA, a friend of Jim's, a friend of mine, a friend of Ray's, Paul Ferrara, who persuaded the guys to start making a documentary about themselves. I came aboard after Paul had been shooting for a couple of months as the film editor. I had professional experience as a film editor by that time. I had been out of school a couple of years. And so we started putting this documentary about a band, The Doors, on the road in America during the 60s. And essentially that's what the film is. It's a look at The Doors. It's a look at America in the 60s. And, of course, a great look at Jim Morrison.
What was the point for them, Frank, when they hit it big? Who discovered them? Who pushed them? Who got behind them?
I have to admit that I was out of the country for a year during that period. And so when I left the country, they were still a struggling band. I had seen them just before I left. I was in New York, and I saw them at Ondines, I think, in New York. And I went off to Africa for a year, came back a little bit over a year later, and they were the number one band in America when I got back. It shocked the heck out of me.
So I guess when they started really doing what they were doing then, they must have had a strong studio behind them, and off they went, huh?
Well, I think the record company was very much interested in making a hit band out of The Doors. And, Jack Holzman's a very smart guy, knew the record business. He had a hit band with Love. And so The Doors naturally fell into place. And suddenly when Light My Fire got on the radio, people really loved it. This is what I understand. As I said, I was far from all of this. I was in another continent and there was no radio where I was living. And there was this tremendous outpouring of emotion for not only for Jim, but for the music. That was it. Light My Fire caught on. That first album caught on, and by the time they made their second album, they were a number one hit band in America.
Let's move on to that moment in France, Frank. What do you think happened? And as I asked Robbie Krieger and Ray Manzarek, do you think Jim Morrison is still alive? Of course, they said no. What happened?
I wasn't there, George. I don't know what happened. I've listened to all the stories. I've researched it myself, and I don't think he died of a drug overdose. Jim was an alcoholic. He wasn't a drug user. If at all, he was a light recreational drug user. So I don't see that as a possibility. He was an alcoholic. He was using asthma medication at the same time. There could have been something in that. I really can't tell you. The coroner's report, or the doctor that came and examined him, there wasn't really a coroner, but a doctor came and examined his body and said he died of heart failure. Well, that's a pretty generic term, a pretty general term. Yeah. How did he die? We don't know. But I'm willing to bet that Jim did not die of a drug overdose. No matter what he died of, at 27, it's too young for an artist of his stature, his intelligence, his ability to die. and it's a shame that we lost him.
Frank, in the movie, and I know it's Hollywood, but there was a scene right before the girlfriend went into the bathroom to see him dead in the tub. There was a shot of a guy leaving the room. It was kind of a weird, surreal scene. Do you remember that?
No, I really can't recall that. But then again, as you said, it's a Hollywood bio, and we really can't depend on any of that for factuals. Anything factual. In fact, Robbie just recently said that he hopes that people who have seen the Oliver Stone film, will see Feast of Friends, and I'm quoting here what Robbie said, so they'll see how Jim really was.
Yeah, well, his head was near the faucet in the tub. I don't know many people who take a bath and they put their head toward the faucet side. Their feet are always that way. I found that to be strange.
Yeah, I would find that to be strange too, George. I don't know. Again, I've done a lot of research about this. I've talked to a lot of people. Jim wrote us a letter, inviting us to come and stay with him in Paris just 3 or 4 weeks before his death. The letter is, full of good cheer. He's talking about Paris. He's happy to be there. He's talking about trips they had taken. He said, we've been traveling in Spain, Morocco, southern France, and Corsica. He said, there's an extra room, so please come stay with us. This does not sound like a guy who was depressed or who was on hard drugs or who was at the end of his rope, as a lot of people have characterized him.
You would have been 71 years old today, and you must be close to his age, plus or minus. But, heck, you sound like you're 35 years old, Frank.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You do. You really do sound young. Good for you. How much do you miss him?
Oh, a lot. Doing this book has brought me back face-to-face and in touch with him again. But, I miss his intelligence. I miss hanging out with him. I miss his jokes and his funny ways. Sure, I miss him. I mean, we end up missing the people we're close to in a way that's psychological and physical, I think. And, I really miss contact with him. We had a lot of fun together, and we did a lot of great projects together.
Frank, do you think he would have succeeded in the music field today with all the kinds of artists we've got and the different kinds of music? Do you think he would have still made it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. He would have been able to do anything he wanted to do. George, he had an intelligence that was off the scale. I became a filmmaker, of course, and made a lot of documentaries and interviewed a lot of people. And until I met Linus Pauling, a 2-time Nobel Prize winner, I never met anyone as intelligent as Jim.
So he was the driving force behind this great group of guys, wasn't he?
Well, I think he was the word guy. He was the intelligent word guy who spun the tales in the songs, who wrote the poetry for the songs. But I think it was a group effort. I think the three of them, the other three musicians contributed as much as Jim in their own way. You just can't have a guy standing up shouting poetry. We know where that gets you. You need the music behind him.
You sure do. Let's talk a little bit about Ray Manzarek, too. It was sad to see him go, and a great talent as well. How did they all get together? I mean, were they high school friends? What happened?
Well, Ray and Jim met at the film school at UCLA. So that's a place where a lot of things happened. They met there. They took classes together. Me and I was in the classes at the same time. So when they had both graduated, they met one day in Venice, and Jim read Ray some of his poetry, and Ray said that would make great lyrics. Can you sing some of this for me? And Jim tried to sing a few bars of some of the lyrics, and Ray said, wait a minute, I think we've got something. Let's see if we can get a band together. And how they came upon Robbie and John, I forget the story now, but I think Ray was in meditation with both Robbie and John at one point, and they were brought into the band, Robbie first, and then John, because they started out with a girl bass player, I think. I don't remember. I think one of Ray's brothers was or the drummer for Ray's Brothers Band was the original drummer. So, they built it modularly, little piece at a time. First it was Jim writing the lyrics, and then Ray says, let's get the band together. Along comes Robbie. They induct Robbie into the band, and later on John, and then they started making music out of Jim's lyrics. He had a whole notebook full of song lyrics by that time.
And Robbie is the baby of the group. I think he's only 68 years old right now.
He is a baby.
That is something else. Tell me about the dark side of Jim Morrison, Frank. I don't want to dwell on that, but everybody's got that other side of them. What was his?
I think a lot of people read his poetry and read his lyrics and think that he was dwelling on death and the afterlife. I don't think so. I think he was an artist who was exploring all the possibilities of human life. Some of those songs do sound like he was that they were dark, but I just think he was an artist exploring all the possibilities. We read Byron. We might think Byron might be a little bit dark in some of his poetry, but in fact, these people have to know about everything if they're going to come back and report it to us. Jim was not obsessed with death. A lot of people say, oh, he's obsessed with death, that Morrison guy. Well, he wasn't really. He was just looking at the possibilities.
Do you think the media has distorted him?
Absolutely.
And they have.
Absolutely. And I can give you lots of examples. I could point to the first book that was published about the group and trace a history of the rumors and the urban legends and the lies, the sensationalism in that book. A lot of people have mentioned it. Even someone like their producer, Paul Rothschild, talked about that first book. He said something like, I'm furious about the book, and so is everyone else I've talked to who is quoted in it. It's a great piece of sensationalism, very little of which holds true to historical fact. Jim is sensationalized rather spectacularly, and the best part of Jim Morrison is not there. So that's a direct quote from Paul Rothschild, who was one of the best rock producers of our time and knew Jim through 6 studio albums. He would have known the man, and he would have known that he was not being treated fairly. And that book started an avalanche of popularity for Jim Morrison and the Doors, but the popularity of Jim became this sort of mean, some sort of crazy guy.
Yeah.
He wasn't that way. And unfortunately, sensationalism sells, and Jim Morrison, the real person, became obscured by myths and lies and rumors.
Did you know of him as the same Jim Morrison before he hit it big? Did he change at all?
I want to say that he didn't, but our relationship, our friendship at UCLA was just as classmates. And we didn't have like a going out together and hanging out together kind of friendship. I was married at the time. Jim was a single guy. So, you don't do the same things usually.
Right.
We saw each other in class. We saw each other during the day. We did, school projects together. But we didn't hang out. So I knew him as a guy in class who was kind of quiet and didn't make a whole lot of noise. Was probably one of the more obscure guys around UCLA at that time. I mean, you have to remember that Coppola went to UCLA just a year before we got there, and so there were a lot of big heavyweights, a lot of people who became stars later on in the movie business who were there. Jim was just a student. And later on, when he became a big star, as I said before, I thought he was just a quiet and humble guy, didn't ever become pretentious about being a star. So there was a trait that went through from film school to stardom. He was the same person in that sort of way.
Died July 3rd, 1971. Frank, what were you doing? What do you recall that day?
We heard the news on the following day, July 4th. A friend of ours, a very good friend of Jim's, Babe Hill, was at our house, and Calvin and I were getting ready to go to Paris to be to be honest with you, we had sublet our apartment. We were packing up and getting ready for a trip. Then we were going to see Jim. So it came as a gigantic shock. The next time I encountered Jim Morrison was in the grave at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. Bill Siddons, Bill Siddons called us. He was on his way to Paris to help Pamela with the arrangements for the burial and all of that. And he called and told us what had happened, and we couldn't believe it. The three of us sat there just without words.
I was 21 years old. I was in Detroit at that time. I remember hearing the story, but I was busy. I was working at that time. I was a radio reporter doing what I did. I was really, I don't want to say I was in shock by it, but to me it was a big story. And I remember we played Doors music, for a week, and we had interviews and things like that. He was surely missed. What was the reaction by some of the other musicians of that time era? Do you recollect that at all?
I recollect going to the Doors office, and I had spent a lot of time there. Kathy, my wife at the time, was the Doors secretary, and we just sat in the Doors office, manning the phone, accepting all the condolence calls that were coming in. There was nonstop. People would come to the office, bring flowers. People would call on the phone. There was a constant stream of calls and people. And some of them, I think, were from other bands and who were on the Strip at the time. I can't recall all of the people who came. It was a tremendous shock to L.A. This was a guy who was identified with Los Angeles. L.A. Woman was the song he wrote about the city. And so people were taken aback by it.
He, of course, died at what is called the 27 Club, at that strange age where so many great musicians passed away at an age of 27 years old. I mean, the Robert Johnsons, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison. I mean, it was just on and on and on. Amy Winehouse, 27 Absolutely. Years old. Yeah. Yes. Do you think about that at all? That 27-year-old club?
Yes, I do, and I've thought about it for a long time, and I once made a list, and I think I got up to something like a dozen or more people who had big star names and died. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones died at 27.
Yeah.
Recently people have died at that age, too. I don't know what it is. Is it a jinx? Is it some sort of moment where you have to cross over, break on through to the other side? I don't know. I don't know. It didn't hit me. I got from 26 to 27 to 28 without a whole lot of difficulty. But maybe fame is too heavy for a young person to carry.
Did he live in the fast track?
Absolutely not.
He did not.
This is a guy who didn't own a luxurious house, who most of the time didn't have his own car, who walked the streets of Los Angeles, sometimes hitchhiking, stayed in a motel room near the Doors office. This was a guy who wore the same clothes for days on end. This was a guy who didn't have anything but maybe a piece of ID and a credit card in his pocket, a few bucks, although usually he didn't have any cash.
Did he have money, though? Was he wealthy when they hit it big?
Well, the other three guys seemed to be wealthy. They had nice houses and beautiful cars and lived a luxurious life. Jim just disdained all of that. Either he disdained it or didn't know how to participate in it. I don't know.
How strange.
He was like a dropout sort of character. He didn't. I mean, what was more important to him was carrying that notebook and writing poetry, doing the art thing, doing the filmmaking thing, doing the performing thing, writing the lyrics. I think that's all he thought about. His whole life was oriented into that gesture of giving back to the universe something that he had inside, making something creative.
Probably put all his money somewhere hidden in a shoebox. You never know.
Well, I think he gave a lot of it away. I think he gave Pamela a small fortune to start her boutique in Hollywood.
Yeah.
He invested his money in a movie that he self-produced and wrote and starred in. You know, I was one of the filmmakers, one of the co-directors on that film.
Uh-huh.
He gave money to itinerant artists who came to the Doors office. There was a group of muralists called the L.A. Art Squad who would come and ask Jim for some money for paint so that they could put a mural on a wall somewhere, and he was always generous giving them money. So I don't know what he did with it, but he didn't spend it in a way that was obvious.
No, it wasn't flamboyant. Frank, we're going to come back, final hour with you. We're going to take phone calls about the life of Jim Morrison on Coast to Coast AM.